If you're a doctor, nurse, chiropractor, or any other medical professional in Australia, you are bound by a strict code of conduct enforced by the Australian Health Practitioner Regulation Agency, Ahpra, where public safety is our priority. For example, in this shared code of conduct, used by dentists, optometrists, pharmacists, and, I kid you not, Chinese medicine practitioners, the very first part of the document isn't a rule for patient care, it's an acknowledgement. Now, is it an acknowledgement to all the hardworking medical professionals, I hear you ask? No, don't be daft. Instead it reads, Ahpra acknowledges the traditional owners of country throughout Australia and their continuing connection to lands, waters and communities. Yes, if you're practicing Chinese medicine in Australia, you better damn well acknowledge the traditional owners. It would be a bit like an Aboriginal dance troupe in Beijing having to acknowledge the revolutionary legacy of Chairman Mao before they're allowed to perform. And as is fashionable these days, the Code of Conduct includes a section on the latest buzzword, the suitably opaque concept of cultural safety. Thank you to the viewer who brought this to my attention. In Section 2 they state, practitioners should consider the specific needs of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples and their health and cultural safety. Although in Section 3 they also note, Section 2 defines cultural safety for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples specifically for their status as First Nations peoples. Culturally safe and respectful practice is important for all communities. Well, why don't they just say that then? If it's important for everyone, why the need to bifurcate the population into Indigenous and non-Indigenous categories? What does that division actually achieve in a clinical setting, other than another dose of virtuous-sounding gobbledygook? On the Ahpra website, they have a joint statement on Aboriginal cultural safety where they talk about self-determination. Specifically, they write, cultural safety is determined by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander individuals, families and communities. Think about that. It's not a fixed principle or a set of clinical guidelines you can actually study and master. Instead, it's a moving target, subjectively determined by the individual patient on the day. Under this logic, you could imagine a scenario where a patient in a hospital ward claims, "You've served me roast beef, which is colonial food. My cultural safety requires witchetty grub stew and barbecued kangaroo tail cooked in a traditional ground oven. If you don't provide it, you're breaching your code of conduct." I don't know about you, but when I'm in a hospital, I'm generally just happy that I'm being looked after and not being measured for a coffin. And if you think none of this matters, well, think again. On their Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Health Strategy Unit page, where you can meet the mob at Ahpra, where are all the men? They note, racist and culturally unsafe practice and behaviour is unlawful and can carry substantive penalties, including deregistration. Yes, if you don't comply with a patient's subjective demand for some ground oven cooked kangaroo tail, you could be facing substantive penalties, up to and including the end of your career. And how far does this so-called cultural safety go? Here's an article published in the prestigious Australian Journal of General Practice, Embedding Cultural Safety to Combat Racism Against Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Peoples. And here are just some of the quotes highlighted by a viewer of mine who works in the industry. Racism is inherent to the structures of settler colonial societies such as Australia, and eradicating all forms of racism requires dismantling settler colonial systems that are founded on racist ideologies and that perpetuate racism, trauma and inequities. The Australian health system is one such system in which racism is structurally inherent. It's a bold claim to make against the very settler colonial framework that actually built the hospitals and developed the modern medicine these activists are now so keen to deconstruct. But most importantly, racism is unlawful, unethical and lethal. As they note further down, it is important to acknowledge that racism is prevalent in the Australian health system and kills Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. Yes, as we've all witnessed in every Australian hospital, unkind words or a lack of cultural safety aren't just offensive, they're apparently as deadly as a botched surgery. The article includes stunning gems such as, "For institutional racism to thrive, people need only the colourblind, meritocratic, ignore the reality of existing privilege and injustices." Yes, you heard that right. In the eyes of the medical establishment, being colourblind and ignoring a person's race is now itself a form of racism. And meritocracy, hiring the best person for the job, is simply a tool for perpetuating injustice. But most importantly, as demanded in the conclusion, non-Indigenous practitioners must cede power and be accountable to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples for providing culturally safe care so that healing from the collective harms of racism is driven by self-determined priorities. As proof of just how obsessed they are with these categories, you may have noticed that just under the title, where they list the authors, their racial background, or lack thereof, is explicitly noted. 2 of the authors are specifically labelled as non-Indigenous, not to mention the only male author on the team is conveniently tucked away at the very end of the list. Because in the modern Australian medical establishment, your clinical expertise doesn't matter nearly as much as which side of the settler colonial fence you sit on. Either you're a First Nations person or you're an outsider. There is no middle ground, and there is no colourblind treatment. So yes, in modern Australia, doctors and nurses are being told they must cede power to the patient's self-determined priorities. What happened to medical expertise? What happened to clinical evidence? Apparently, those take a backseat to cultural safety and the healing of collective harms. And if you don't play along, you might just find yourself deregistered and out of a job. Take that, you settler colonial racist.